When it comes to Tudor history, there are so many questions that we all have that we'd like to have answered. Some of them cannot be answered, others can. Today, I'm going to reference my Facebook page. Yesterday on my Facebook page, I asked all of you if there is one question you could ask about the Tudor Dynasty, what would it be? And I got some great questions that I am going to try and answer for you today. I'm Rebecca Larson, and welcome to my Tudors Dynasty podcast. Let's start off with, it looks like Cassie, and I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrect. Cassie Irish asked, what piqued your interest the most about the Tudors, and how did you become interested in the Tudor era? This is always one of my favorite questions to answer. This goes all the way back to when I was doing genealogy research professionally and helping other people with their research as well as doing mine at the same time. I was researching my mother's side of the family and using Ancestry.com to collect all of my information. And of course on Ancestry, they give you the little leaf or a hint to somebody's tree that you might be attached to. While I was doing my research, I found a leaf that brought me all the way back to Margaret Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII. And I was blown away. At this time, if I remember correctly, the Tudors was on Showtime, and I was really starting to like the show. And then when I found this connection to Margaret Tudor, I was even more excited, thinking, oh my gosh, I am related to these people, and now I get to see their story. This was before I knew really anything about the Tudor dynasty other than Henry VIII, and I really didn't know very much about him either. Margaret Tudor, of course, on the TV show was a combination of Henry's sisters, Mary and Margaret. So they showed Margaret Tudor being married to Charles Brandon, which of course we know was really Mary Tudor. So that really started my interest. I started researching them a little bit more, really started watching the program, got into some Jean Plady books, and really started enjoying it from there. And it just kind of snowballed. Unfortunately, I found out through my family history that I was not related to Margaret Tudor. There was a incorrect branch in the tree that led me away from being related to her. Although I do have strawberry blonde hair, so I assume that somehow I'm related to the Tudors. I had my DNA tested as well, and that came back that I was 61% British, which honestly surprised me. I never expected that to happen. All I ever knew is that I was German, Swiss, and Luxembourgish. So I really expected it to come back as mostly Western European. So when I came back 61% British and 27% Western European, I was pleasantly surprised, and it felt like there was a reason why I became so interested in English history. It's in my DNA. So I feel like if I go back to researching my genealogy, that I may find a connection somewhere to the Tudor dynasty. Because really, once we have English blood, it's just a matter of time to find out who in that royal line you're related to. So that's really what started my interest in the Tudor dynasty. I hope that answers your question, Cassie. Moving on to the next question. I think I'm just going to start from the bottom of the list. Was Catherine of Aragon really a virgin when she married Henry? This is the question, isn't it? Everybody wants to know, was she or wasn't she? Did she lie or was she telling the truth? And honestly, nobody is really going to know the answer to that unless someday we find a diary, maybe by Catherine, that says, no, I wasn't a virgin. But I feel like in my guts, I feel like she was. Now, I may sway and change my mind in 5 minutes, but right now I feel like she was. Catherine was such a religious woman that I don't see her lying, even on her deathbed. She still said that she, was faithful to Henry. So, to answer your question then, Marvin, I do think that Catherine of Aragon was really a virgin. And of course, a lot of people are going to debate that and say, maybe she wasn't, but she said she was so that she could keep all that she had gained with Henry to keep her daughter legitimized and so forth. So thank you for your question, Marvin. Afonso said the Tudor series has a lot of historic errors. Yes, there are quite a few historic errors in there. As I pointed out, the Mary and Margaret Tudor thing was inaccurate. There are a lot of inaccuracies, but if you know enough about the Tudor Dynasty when you watch it, you'll recognize those things and probably chuckle about them, because that's what I found myself doing. But as a first-time watcher of the program, as I was learning about the Tudors, to be honest, it just really interested me more in the dynasty, and I began reading more and learning what was incorrect in the series, which then just drove me more to want to know what really happened. My interest has always been in Tudor women. I've always been most interested in those who were considered insignificant because they were women, and wanting to know their stories. So if you go back, pages and pages on my blog, you will see that I like to focus on women more than men. It's just more interesting. I feel like they saw more things, and maybe they're more mysterious because we don't know so much about them. So if I can find information on them, I try to share that with you. A lot of that will be done through letters that I find, through, contemporary records. There's a lot of stuff that's available online that I think a lot of you probably aren't aware. It's free. You can go to Google and search Google Books, and as long as you can figure out the right search terms to use, you will find information. And it's, like I said, it's free. So, start searching now. Suze Patterson, maybe it's Susie, so I apologize if that's wrong. Why do all the paintings basically look like the same face? Well, I know for a matter of fact that Elizabeth, when she was the reigning monarch, there was what you'd probably call a template that was used for her so that her face looked the same in most of them. I'm not sure if the same was said for Henry VIII. My only other answer to that would be, well, that's what he looked like, and that's why they look the same. So that's something that maybe you or I can do a little bit more research on to learn about the other monarchs. I feel like I've seen a bunch of different paintings on Mary that show her in some different light. Whether they're confirmed or not, I do not know. Paintings are definitely not my expertise, so I love to look at them. I love to analyze the facial features. But as far as why they look the same, I would only assume that either A, there was a template used, or B, it's just how they looked. Lynn, hello Lynn, was Henry impotent toward the end? Well, I think there was no question about that. He was an older man too, so near the end I think he had some problems, especially when it came to Catherine Parr, which I'm sure she was not upset about. However, when he was younger, I think he was fine. As he got older, I truly believe that Henry suffered from diabetes. The way, all the weight gain that he had, his ulcer in his leg not healing, a lot of that really points towards him being diabetic. So, along with that, he may have had some problems. It appears, with Anne of Cleves, was she really that unattractive, or was it just Henry not being able to perform? My guess would be his weight gain, along with the diabetes and all of that, and his, aging, all compiled to him having problems in this area. Melissa asks, who is your favorite of the 6 wives? This is a hard one for me. I really go back and forth, and the more I learn about one, then she becomes my favorite. I think it started out that I thought Anne Boleyn was my favorite because it's such a tragic story. And then from Anne, I went to Catherine of Aragon. I mean, she was his longest wife, and she was such a strong woman that there's something really to admire about her. Right now, I might gear, or lean a little bit more towards Catherine Parr. And that's probably because I've been researching Thomas Seymour so long and doing a lot of reading about Elizabeth. And I feel like Catherine Parr was the one who really tried to bring Henry and his children together. She was smart. I don't know if I could say she's the smartest of all of his wives, but she really found a way to outwit him, even when she was going to be arrested. There's a warrant out for her. She found a way to smooth talk Henry out of this. And there's something very admirable about that. However, after he died, she made some silly mistakes. She should have waited to marry Thomas Seymour, and God only knows how things would have changed had that, happened. Had she waited 2 years and then married him. But then again, in that meantime, he may have gotten approval to marry Elizabeth, which I highly doubt. But so I'd say right now, my favorite queen is probably Catherine Parr. But again, I really go back and forth because they all have admirable traits too. Anne of Cleves, I think she was brilliant. She was smart enough to know you don't disagree with the king. Look what's happened to his previous wives when they did. I'll just say, yes, I'll accept this and become your sister and share the wealth. She saw, she knew the stories of what had happened to his first 3 wives. And I think in the long run, she outlived all of them as well. So admirable there. Catherine Howard, to me, she is such an innocent. She was so young, Who knows what would have become of her if she hadn't married Henry. I feel like she would have just been lost to history like many of the Tudor women of the time. So we don't really know. She made mistakes, yes, but she was young. She was naive. Oh, I don't know what else to say about her. Her story makes me so sad as well. And Jane Seymour, of course, gave him the healthy son that survived, who would become king. But there's part of me too that maybe doesn't like her as much because of the part that she played in Anne's downfall and her family's part. But I don't know what really happened back then, and I wasn't a fly in the wall, so I don't want to hold anything against any of the queens. So I know I probably didn't really answer your question, but that's the best answer I can give you, Melissa. Crystal asks, if we could go back in time, what part of this period would you want to be in? I would say I would probably want to be at the very beginning of Henry's reign in 1509. To me, those were the glory days. 1509, maybe to 1511, maybe even past then, but right at the beginning. When you read these contemporary reports, they really make it sound like it was such a wonderful time of celebration and jousts and parties, and there were so many young people at court. So if I were to go back in time to any portion of the Tudor Dynasty, I would definitely go back to the very beginning of the reign of Henry VIII, before all the Anne Boleyn stuff started. To me, that seems like that would have been the most entertaining part of his reign. Claire asks, why did Henry execute Anne rather than divorce her? Did he truly believe the accusations? I'm going to give you my opinion on this. I feel like Henry had just reached a point with Anne that he didn't want to be married to her anymore. And she had not given him a son like she had promised. And Anne was very opinionated. She spoke her mind, which I think sometimes got her in trouble. By today's standards, she would be probably just like you and me. However, back in the Tudor area, women were supposed to be more submissive, even if they were a queen. She helped with the Reformation and a lot of changes in England, and I feel like a lot of people did not like her because of that, especially Catholics. So I feel like Henry at that point felt that like he was cornered. He had made a mistake by marrying her. However, they had this daughter, they did have a daughter together. I believe that he executed her because he thought of it as the only way to stop all the nonsense. In my opinion, if he had allowed Anne to live and sent her to a nunnery, she would not have been quiet. She would have fought for her daughter until it became her death anyway. She wanted Elizabeth to get what was rightfully hers no matter what. And I respect her for that. I feel like any mother would do that for their child. So I think, executing her was just his only way out, unfortunately. I don't condone him for doing that, but I feel like that was his only way out. And I don't think he truly believed the accusations. I feel like maybe Cromwell and some of his men could have tried to convince him of it, and he may have acted outwardly that he believed them, and he may have taken it out on Elizabeth later. But I feel like maybe some of that would have been a show, or, he had a bruised ego because of all the stories that were coming out about Anne having an affair with all of these men that were his friends. I really don't think he believed them to be true. Unless Cromwell was, really good at convincing him. So I feel like he knew this was just his way to get rid of her. And then he had to deal with her daughter, which he did not do a very good job dealing with Elizabeth, unfortunately. All right, Marion says, did Henry have syphilis? And is that why he didn't sire many children and that a lot of them died at birth? No, Henry did not have syphilis. I believe there have been studies done on this. It's a very common thing to hear out there in the Tudor world when you're on different websites and blogs and whatnot. But no, he did not. Part of me thinks it's because the royals, so far back in history, married their cousins, some of them married their nieces, and there was a lot of inbreeding that way, which can kind of mess up a line a little bit. But to answer your question in short, no, he did not have syphilis, and unfortunately, he only had 3 surviving children, 4 if you count Henry Fitzroy. And then we have the question about all the illegitimate children too. Were they really his or weren't they? I wish we had a definite answer to that. Why would he not claim them if they were his illegitimate children, especially if they were male? But I also think once he had Edward, he was his legitimate heir, so why would he then recognize some of the older boys that he had? Because I think that would have just caused problems down the line as far as fighting for the throne, and then we'd be right back into the Wars of the Roses era type stuff again. So, hope that answers your question. Stephen says, do you think Mary ever stood a chance to be Queen of England? I'm not 100% sure I understand that question, but I feel like out of all the children that Mary was probably most prepared for the position. However, with the Reformation and her Catholic faith, I feel like that really worked against her. If England had remained a Catholic country, I think that Mary would have been a much better ruler than she was. I feel like the reputation that she gets now is very unfair. I just made a post on Facebook about this as well. I feel some sympathy towards Mary. She gets called Bloody Mary, but is that fair to call her that? And I really don't feel like it is. Did she have Protestants burned? Yes, she did. But her father also had tens of thousands of people executed, so I feel like that's very unjust. I feel like she could have done more had she also became queen earlier. If Edward had died before his father died and Mary took the throne, there is a good possibility things would have been better. So, if we look at history the way that it is, I don't think she stood a very good chance at becoming a very good ruler just because of the circumstances that surrounded her at the time. Could she have been a good ruler? I believe she could have. I mean, look who her mother was, who her father was. even being mistreated in her youth, I feel like that made her stronger. So that's my answer, Stephen. Thank you. Taylor says, does it bother you as much as me that Elizabeth I didn't have a middle name? It literally makes me upset, says Taylor. No, it doesn't upset me at all. I feel like I don't think any of them had a middle name back then. All the reading that I've done, I haven't seen any middle names, so I don't feel like it was as common, or they just didn't use them. So I don't really have much more to say about that, so I hope that answers your question, Taylor. Christina says, what was the beauty ideal of a woman? So I think the ideal beautiful woman in Tudor England was fair hair, blue eyes. And most of the time it wasn't like overly thin. They weren't looking for thin women because women who were a little bit more plump, I would say, were more desirable because they thought that they were good at bearing children then. So, fair hair, blue eyes. Definitely all the opposite of what Anne Boleyn was. Okay, Donna asks, why didn't Henry legitimize Henry Fitzroy? He had a son and didn't have to be so maniacal about having another. Okay, I kind of covered this a little bit earlier, but I really feel like the reason why he didn't legitimize him and only recognized him and gave him titles was because it just would have caused more problems in the long run. If we go back in English royal history, fighting over the throne, legitimizing what they would declare as a bastard, just ended up causing more problems than anything. Then you'd have factions who were of the legitimate line who would then fight against the illegitimate line, and it really just, I think Henry realized it wasn't worth legitimizing Henry Fitzroy because in the long run it would hurt the Tudor dynasty. The most important thing to Henry VIII was to help his father carry on the dynasty. That's why he wanted a son, a legitimate son, so badly, because if he had let his father down, that would all be on him. He would be responsible for killing out the Tudor line, the line that his father had fought so long and so hard for. Hazel says, do you believe that the trauma and head injuries sustained during jousting events led Henry to mental illness towards Anne Boleyn? In some history groups, this is the assumption. What do you think? Well, I don't think necessarily that the head injuries are what caused him to act the way that he did. I really feel like the ulcer in his leg, which came from jousting injuries, is what led him to be the man that he became later, and towards Anne and his later wives. The pain that he experienced from the ulcer in his leg must have been excruciating. I try to imagine having this sore in your leg and the throbbing pain and it never healing. He would have good patches and bad patches, but when it was bad, it was really bad for him. And so imagine yourself in constant pain every day. Let's say every day of your life, you have this pain in your leg and it hurts so bad. What kind of mood would that put you in? I know for myself, if I have a headache or if I have, let's say, a strained muscle in my back from sneezing because I'm getting older, it makes me cranky, and for me it only lasts a few days or a few hours, but during that time I am cranky and everyone around me, has to deal with my wrath, unfortunately, and I feel like that's the way it was with Henry VIII. The pain in his leg turned him into the monster who he became. So I do sympathize with him for that. They didn't have the medicine that we have now, and I feel like if it were modern times, things would have been different. They would have been able to heal him. They would have maybe realized that he was diabetic, and that's the reason why this ulcer would not heal. They would have been able to give him insulin, antibiotics, so many of those things. But I really feel like not necessarily a head injury. That's been disputed, around. And there was a while where I thought it was a head injury that caused it, but now my belief is it's just the ongoing pain in his leg that made him the man that he became. Sylvia asks, what is your opinion about Henry's treatment towards Elizabeth after Anne's demise? He mistreated both daughters at some point, and I felt pity for Mary as well, but I think it was much more pitiful for Elizabeth, since she was a little child when the mistreatment began. And what do you believe was the main reason for his treatment towards her? Could it be the fact that Elizabeth reminded him of Anne, or the fact that he didn't want her in the way of his new children that he will have with his other queens? I would say, to answer your question about his treatment towards Elizabeth, I really do believe it is because she reminded him of Anne. You know, stories have been told about how Elizabeth's eyes were the same as her mother's. And imagine Henry, wrongfully executing this woman that he had been madly in lust with for many years. We don't know if he really loved her or not. I still feel like there was so much lust there, and I feel like he admired her smarts. But after he had her executed, seeing Elizabeth, I'm sure, was difficult for him. I'm sure she reminded him every time he saw her of his late wife that he had put to death. So, and the same for Mary too. I feel like it was just hard for him to have both of them around because they both reminded him of these wives that he treated so badly, who had been so good to him. Okay, this is starting to get longer than I thought it was going to. So I'm only going to do a couple more, and then I will try to do another one to answer the rest of the questions. Let's look at Nerida. I hope that's how you pronounce your name, and if not, I apologize. Nerida says, who did you think did away with the princes in the tower? Or, considering disease, hygiene, and nutrition not at its premium, did they die of natural causes? This is such a hard one, and I know no matter how I answer this, people are going to get upset. I've always felt like Richard III had the most to gain from the death of the princes in the tower. Yes, they were his nephews, but he did have the most to gain. However, I never felt like before Edward IV died that Richard would have done something like that. But power is a strange thing. Having the ability to have England as your own, I can only imagine how you'd want something like that. He was named Lord Protector over his nephew Edward. So it's a tough one. I really feel like he had the most to gain. Is it possible that both Edward and Richard in the tower became ill and died? Yes, that's totally possible. And maybe that's why Richard always claimed, he had nothing to do with it. But he did have their bodies disposed of one way or another. So, in that respect, he was responsible because he knew what had happened to him. I do not believe that Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII, or his mother had anything to do with it. I feel like where they were at the time, that this was not possible. I know that Margaret Beaufort's husband worked in the tower at the time, and people say that he had access to the keys. But if I remember correctly from reading, that he didn't really have access to their room during the time when they disappeared. I could be wrong there. I'm just going off the top of my head right now. But I'm going to circle back to Richard III had the most to gain. And I know I'm going to upset the Ricardians, and I'm so sorry for that. This is just my opinion from all that I've read over the years. Erica says, how do you think Henry VII and Elizabeth of York would have reacted about Henry VIII's entire reign? Do you think they would be proud, or do you think they would have been horrified on how he treated others? That's a great question. And I do feel like Elizabeth of York was the softer side of parenting that Henry VIII needed. So I feel like maybe she would have been a little disappointed in his reign and what he did. And I feel like Henry VII probably would have supported his son in all that he did. I have a feeling he was proud of the way that Henry ran his kingdom, even though he spent most of his money. I feel like he would have respected the fact that Henry did everything that he could to continue the Tudor line, because that, in the end, was the most important thing to Henry VII. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for today with answering questions on this podcast, and I will make a second one that talks about the other questions that I was unable to answer in this one. I just did not want this to end up being an hour long, because nobody has an hour to sit and listen to somebody talk, or want to sit and listen to somebody talk. I might even be boring myself right now, so I apologize if this is boring. I love to hear your feedback. I love the questions that you guys come up with. It's so fun to interact with all of you, because we all have the same passion in the end, and I love being able to have discussions with you. I also love to be able to clear things up when there's some confusion on facts. And when I do it, I try really hard to do it nicely, because I know there are some pages out there where you make a statement that you truly believe is true, and somebody will come and make you feel dumb and say, how did you not know that? This is false, and, where's your documentation? I try really hard not to do that. I try to use my page as an educational source. I'm not an expert. I'm just a Tudor enthusiast. I love to read, and I love doing this research. So I hope you all understand that all I'm trying to do is spread the word about the Tudor Dynasty in the best way that I can. So thank you again so much for following my website, for following my Facebook page, my Twitter page, my Instagram page. What else do I have? I even have a Snapchat, but I rarely use that because I don't get Snapchats. So thank you again. I really appreciate all of your support. We're getting very close to having 20,000 likes on the page, which blows my mind. My 2-year anniversary of the website is coming up here in June, so we'll have to do something special for that. So thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.